Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Spooky season is officially here, and it's a great excuse to bring out one of my favorite campaign board games. This is Vagrantsong, and SideGame LLC has been lucky enough to receive a copy for review purposes from Wyrd Games of Vagrantsong Encore. Now, this is a pre-production copy. That means that it's not complete. There's a lot that's missing, only a couple of scenarios, but it still gives us a good feel, an idea of what's to come in the upcoming expansion content for Vagrantsong, and we're going to cover all of the things that I've played here on the channel so that you can make an informed decision on whether or not it's something that you're looking to back in the near future. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It's the best way to help us grow, and for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's get in and talk about Vagrantsong Encore. Now, before we begin, full disclosure, a copy of Vagrantsong Encore was provided to SideGame LLC for review purposes, and as mentioned before, it is an incomplete copy. That means that everything is still undergoing development. The scenarios, only a couple of them were available, just 3, and we'll talk about those 3 scenarios throughout this video, as well as some of the components are in the box, but there aren't necessarily scenarios or rules to actually play with everything. And I'll detail all this later in the video, but I wanted to let you know up front that we are not getting paid for this, for recommending this. These are my honest opinions of the game and giving you an informed decision about how you want to proceed with this upcoming Vagrantsong content. With that all being said, and before we get into the review of the Encore content, let's do a quick overview of Vagrantsong as a whole. Now, this is published by Wyrd Games, designed by Matt Carter, Justin Gibbs, and Kyle Rowan, with incredible art by Win My Diem. So this team has come together to bring a cooperative experience for 2 to 4 players. It can be played solo by using multi-handed characters, but you are taking your team and trying to restore the humanity to spirits, Haints, on a ghost train. So you play as these vagrants, jumping from boss to boss as you are playing unique scenarios that all have their own different rules, ways that terrain works, and the enemies interact with your characters. You'll use your different abilities on your characters, and every single round you'll be assigning these coins in order to take actions. These actions will allow you to move around the map, roll dice, activate skills and abilities, and then it'll go into the Haints' turn where they'll be pulling some chips out of this bindle bag that will determine how they react. Now, each of those boss fights is going to have the characters moving, interacting differently, and you'll also have these rituals that are at the bottom of the board here that will give you your own specific objectives that you're trying to complete, while also trying to complete the main objective of whatever the scenario you're playing is. The scenario system makes it one that's a campaign game that you'll want to play again and again because they are so different and varied. It's going to be something that you're excited to play more of, but it also makes it so that it's something that you can put down for a while and bring back out, sort of like a single shot scenario experience, which is my preferred way to play Vagrantsong. Yes, there are some weeks where I'm in the mood for playing a bunch of Vagrantsong in a row, but then there's also times where I pull it out for an awesome session, have people join that have never played before, put it away, and then bring it out later and still get that same satisfying experience of having that cooperative boss battle adventure in this spooky setting. So I love the entire experience of Vagrantsong, and that gives you sort of an idea of what it's about and my background with Vagrantsong. It's a game that I already enjoy, so keep that in mind as I talk about this expansion and as we get into the nitty-gritty of each of the different things offered in this campaign. Let's get into Vagrantsong Encore. Now, at the time of this recording, the campaign page is not live for Encore, but I'll leave a link in the description below, so when it is, you can access it through there. Now, that being said, the pictures that you're going to see here are from Wyrd Games' website, as well as from pictures that I've taken myself, so we can get an idea of what actually is in here. Now, that being said, Encore is a combination of quality of life improvements, additional tokens and standees that you'll be able to use in every game, but also additional gameplay content in the form of new scenarios, add-ons to your original campaign, and smaller, shorter campaigns that you can access through these small, tiny event decks that are additional ways to approach a smaller, quicker campaign. Now, not all of this was available, but I'm going to talk through each of these different items that I did experience and did play with and see what my final thoughts are on for each of these smaller modules, as well as the larger scenarios, and wrap up with my final thoughts of the entire thing. Let's start off with the first module, and these are the Smoky Bones. Now, Smoky Bones are additional dice that your characters can accrue throughout the scenario through the use of special abilities, or sometimes even the scenario effects, so they can be used as positive rewards throughout the experience, and it's something that I enjoy that you're able to interact with that also gives you more decision points throughout a scenario. The way they work is after you roll dice for any reason, you can decide to use some of your Smoky Bones. You can hold 2 on your character at a time, so you are encouraged to use them, particularly if you have abilities that passively generate them, or if the scenario does. It's having you engage with them, having you use them. So you roll the dice, and based on what you get, if it's a number, you add that to some of the pips on the test that you just performed, or if it's a skull, it's an auto fail, so it is a bit risky to engage with them. Just a 1 in 6 though, but you also have a 1 in 6 chance of an additional success. You have this music note symbol that can give you extra successes. I love that it offers more decision points from the turn to turn. It happens after the fact, so you can decide if you want to push your luck, and it's also limited, so you decide if you want to engage with it more. It's an easy to include expansion, and it comes from multiple areas, whether it be the scenario giving you a way to fight back, or maybe you invest in these Smoky Bones through your different junk or skill abilities, and the way that it interacts with some of the different skill cards is super interesting. For example, this Soothing Hymn here wants you to roll double, so if you decide to roll Smoky Bones, this can allow you to get into positions being able to trigger those bonus abilities. In addition, some of your skills are going to be a higher success rate. You need a 5 or a 6 in order to trigger them for awesome abilities, so this allows you to more reliably access your super awesome effects, and I love that. It's an extra choice, an extra thing that you can get, but it's not intrusive, and it lets you do more cool things with your characters. This is a perfect expansion component for me, one of the best modules in here. This is the Smoky Bones module. Our next module here is a small quality of life improvement. These are the turn tracker tokens. You've got go on one side and stop on the other side. They just show the table that, hey, I've taken my turn already, or I haven't taken it yet and I'm ready to go. I love that it's a tiny visual that's just on the board, but it's big enough to be seen from a distance, and you can clearly look and say, okay, that person hasn't gone yet. Maybe we talk about who's going next, and it keeps you organized in the round, making sure that no one is getting skipped and you're not repeating anything either. I love how simple this works, and it's a clear visual. Those are the turn tracker tokens, another no-brainer addition to every single game of Vagrantsong. The next quality of life upgrade are these generic coins, small 1-cent coin pieces that you can use as a visual reminder when you've earned them throughout the scenarios through the rituals. A lot of times if you complete those objectives, they'll give you extra spending money, and now you have something tangible that once you earn it, you set it to the side, and then during the camp phase, you can visually allocate it so you can see what you're spending and where you're allocating things towards. I think it's an awesome visual and makes a lot of sense. There's also some promise of creative uses of these generic coins, as certain scenarios and abilities and skills could use these in future designs. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like, but for right now, just being used as those simple trackers for those coins that you earn during the scenarios and you can spend in the camp phase later, I think that the generic coins work perfectly. And that brings us to our last quality of life module. These are the Westbound Vagrant Standees. There's one for each of the playable characters in the game, and in classic Vagrantsong fashion, they are displayed thematically and beautifully on acrylic plastic standees, so you can see all of the artwork clearly. Now, these are not only beautiful and thematic, but they're also serving a functional gameplay purpose as they show which characters have entered their Westbound states. This is one of the lost conditions for the game. If all of your characters become Westbound, then that means that the scenario is lost. All of those characters have lost their humanity as well. So it's up to you to hopefully regain that humanity for those characters so they don't permanently lose one of their skills at the end of the game. So I love that it's a visual reminder on the table of who has gone Westbound or not, and it also is going to give you that artwork on the board as opposed to just in front of your character. It's a simple addition, but it's one that I think is thematic and awesome. These are the Westbound Vagrant Standees for Vagrantsong. The next addition is more junk cards. Now, junk cards are special abilities that each of your character gets. You get to customize each of your vagrants, bringing in a single junk card primarily, and that's going to give you some ability that you'll get to use throughout the scenario. These can be passive, active, things that you are going to constantly be able to trigger and use over and over again, and the new junk cards here are pretty dang awesome. Some of these cards are going to give you access to some of the new components in the expansion, like the Smoky Bones, and then some are going to interact with base game mechanisms in new and interesting ways. These are some of my favorites here. The pickling jar, whenever you fail on a test, you're going to get a smoky bone in return. I love that because that gives you an incentive for pushing your luck onto these cool abilities and effects and giving you a way that you can fail forward and access those awesome abilities later on. You also have some that interact with the bindle, this bag that you're going to getting items from, and the more items you can use each round, the more powerful it feels to me. I love getting to use event tokens as rummage tokens, as well as them for their printed abilities. And that being said, some of these items are also going to interact with the bindle using some of the coins, and generally they're going to be your coins actually. You'll be able to shuffle them into the bag, so that way when they show up almost like event tokens, they'll get to trigger an additional special ability. I love this design space and want to see more of the potential junk effects. So I haven't played with every single junk yet, but from what I've seen, there's a lot of promise, and I can see this spilling over to some of the unlockable skill cards from the scenarios as well. And that being said, there are some of these junk cards that when I was playing, I felt that they just weren't as powerful than some of the others. For example, one of them said that if you failed the test on your next test, you could just do it again. So normally you can't use a skill 2 turns in a row, but this one said that you could. That just wasn't that interesting to me. It didn't have as much inherent value as some of these other junk that you can see here with getting the extra smoky bones or being able to use multiple items. And so it felt to me that there were some items that were clearly just better than others, but there's no real reason to pick some of those weaker ones. Now that being said, there are some things that you can unlock in your game, some characters that can utilize multiple junks, and so you can create cool combos with some of these lesser effects, or maybe just having a passive ability of some sort that lets you interact with junks. So there are still reasons to have them, and of course they're going to scale up as you play. That is something to be aware of, that you will see some junk cards that, while it's a neat idea, it might not be super powerful in practice. So those are the new junk cards, brand new ideas, exploring new spaces of this game design. Looking forward to playing with more of them. So those were some of the smaller modular components that came in the expansion that you can throw in as soon as you open the box. But let's get into some of the more specific scenarios that you can enjoy. So there were 3 included with this preview kit. Let's talk about the first one, Let the Light In. Now, Let the Light In is a unique take on the Mothman mythos. You're going to be playing against this gambling character who is going to engage with you in a bunch of different minigames. Now, I'm just going to tell you right from the front here, this is one of the best scenarios for Vagrantsong, period, and that includes all of the content in the core game. This is a 10 out of 10 scenario for me. So Let the Light In is going to offer you a way to interact with the boss every single step of the way. It gives you more options throughout the entire experience on your turn, during the middle of an enemy activation, as well as when the character is going to be switching back and forth between modes. One of the main ways that they do this is through the use of the swarm tokens. So it's a new type of terrain that represents the moths on the train, and it's going to be traveling around the different areas, and the Mothman can actually get stronger the more moths that they're able to absorb. But you have ways that you can fight back on this. Also, you can plan on where the Mothman is going to be maneuvering, because they have a way that they can teleport between the different moths. So you can position yourself around these, make it so that you can play into what you think that the Mothman may do based on the odds and the amount of bindle tokens that have been revealed. So many different decisions that you're making on your turn based on the situation, the terrain, the setting. It allows you to make important decisions with your movement, as well as how you're dealing damage and when you're dealing with it. Another point of interaction is the good luck status tokens. You can clearly see them down here on the bottom. You use the tracker to actually display how many you currently have unlocked. I like that. That's a simple way to keep things organized. But you can use these during certain points of the enemy's activation in order to ignore certain parts of their attacks or their abilities. Now, the Mothman hits hard, so having this way that you can decide on which hits you want to take and which ones you want to ignore, also getting that currency throughout the experience and being able to interact with it even more, opens up this space of this scenario and makes it tense and exciting throughout the entire experience. Now, one last thing that I love about the scenario in addition is the fact that you have lots of tiny gambling minigames, and some of those will include the components from the expansion, including Smoky Bones. This means that you're able to interact and unlock Smoky Bones dice even if you haven't
even invested into them with your skill or your junk cards. It means you get to use the cool components, and also you're able to still use them on different effects that you've brought into the scenario with you. There's a lot to love in this expansion, juggling those multiple currencies, those opportunities, and being able to interact with the game throughout the entire scenario. This is an incredible scenario. This is Let the Light In, the first scenario in this box. Scenario 2 is May the Dream Never End, and this is a look at a new type of scenario where one of your vagrants has gone westbound several times and their soul is no longer tethered. They are going to lose their humanity for good and have dire consequences unless you can save them. And this elevates this to an actual full-on boss battle where your fellow vagrant is now somebody that you're going to have to try to save. Now, this scenario in particular also features two distinct halves, and I love how this concept can be done with the mood changes. You can have it one half on the happy mood, and then as soon as it's ready to flip, it moves to that unhappy mood, and then you're able to have a brand new scenario. So you've got two different halves, one where you're manipulating the different terrain, and the second half having you actually going and trying to restore that humanity to the Empress here. Thematics and premise aside, May the Dream Never End was my least favorite scenario in this box. The first half felt procedural and rote as I had correct choices to make. As you can see, there are event tokens that are on the left and right side of this setup, which meant that when I was playing the two-player game, I had to send one character to one side and one character to the other side. There was a hard time limit where if you didn't get those events completed in time, then the second half of the scenario was going to be more difficult. And it felt pretty arbitrary as I was entirely based on what tokens are being pulled from the bindle, as my characters themselves were spending their entire time moving as well as activating that investigate to claim that token. It felt to me there weren't any big choices, and I was just waiting to get to that second half of the experience. When the second half hits, it's time to restore the humanity to the Westbound Empress. The Westbound Empress has a special ability where they can only receive a single humanity at a time. What this means is you are encouraged to use a bunch of small instances of humanity gaining abilities, as opposed to using your super powerful effects or some of your skill cards. Now, to me, that's not as interesting because I want to use these cool, powerful effects, and unfortunately, this part of the game made it so they weren't as effective if you did so. So you were using those smaller, weaker effects instead. There is another way that you can deal humanity, and that's in using these events in the corners here. So that was another thing that you were going to do, is rush to those corners to activate those abilities while in the process using your humanity gaining abilities every single time you had the opportunity to. Now, that being said, this also felt to me a little bit like that first half where my choices were made for me as I was doing whatever was the most efficient, making sure that I was getting those little chips in while progressing towards those corners. So I wasn't having as much fun as I would like in this scenario overall, and these two halves were unfortunately not the strongest, especially coming from that first scenario with Let the Light In. Now, that being said, this was only a two-player game, so potentially having more players engaged meant that people could maybe engage with those events more, and talking to the designers, they said that a lot of people enjoyed this scenario, but not one that I enjoyed myself. This is my least favorite experience from this box. That's scenario 2, and that is May the Dream Never End. And that brings us to our last bit of gameplay content. This is Scenario 3, Work to Death. Now, Work to Death is a perfect pairing of themes and mechanisms, as you have a furnace that is front and center in this scenario. It's going to be spewing out these terrible status conditions in the form of burns that make it so it's a bit of push your luck as you're trying to get close to it to interact with it, potentially using these slag piles to deal extra damage, but also keeping your distance and minding your timing as you want to make sure that you're able to interact with it at the most opportune times. One of my favorite parts about this encounter is the way that you can use the different terrains as defensive and offensive options, as you're able to use them to block the fire that's being spewed or to feed the flames. And there's some cool things that you can do with the furnace, as it's going to try to draw you in to burn you up, so you can use that to your own benefits, trying to time yourself so that the furnace pulls you, you're able to use it on your round and then get out of there to hopefully put yourself in a more ideal position. I love the sensation of juggling the danger and the threat of the furnace while also trying to complete all the rituals and mitigating the disaster of the Haint effects and using those debris to the best of your ability. There's one last thing that I want to talk about in this scenario, but before before I do, if you want to skip it, it does have slight spoilers. You can take a look at the timestamps below and just move on to the next section. But if you are going to stay here for this, the biggest miss in this scenario for me was the good enough event. Essentially, if you did win the scenario, you had the opportunity to get a bigger victory by doing an additional win condition. And this came in the form of positioning Slagpile Annie and getting her to the far right of the train, while there would be a new Haint that would spawn and would attack Slagpile Annie and tried to push her to the other side of the train. And what ended up happening was we played about 15 to 20 minutes of this, where on the Vagrant's turn, they would gain humanity to Slagpile Annie, move her, and then the Haint would take its turn and completely undo the action that we had just done. And this essentially made it just go back and forth, a minor gain, a minor loss of movement, and it just kept on happening, was not exciting, and ultimately came to the point where we just decided to stop playing because no big choices were being made, and we were just doing a repetitive process over and over again. I hope this is something that the Wyrd Miniatures teams does change, maybe making this having some other options that you can take to try to get to that victory condition. It is something that I did talk to them about it, so that is something they are aware of. So that's just a small little tinge on an overall incredible scenario that is worked to death, the final included preview scenario in Vagrantsong Encore. Before we get to my final thoughts and my ultimate recommendation for the expansion, I want to quickly cover one thing that was included in the rulebook, but the gameplay components are not actually included in this preview kit because they're just not done yet, but they will be included in the final copy of the game. And that is the short trip mode components. These are additional event cards, these in-between event cards that'll happen between scenario to scenario that give you this new way to play Vagrantsong. It's going to give you a smaller, shorter campaign mode that's going to give you a brand new set of events that you get to play with, some starting and ending scenarios that are going to be unique to this short trip mode, and then stringing on some of the bosses from all of the other content. I love the concept of being able to engage with Vagrantsong in multiple venues, and you don't have to commit to an entire large campaign to do so. This gives you some flexibility with which different characters, which different layouts, abilities, choices that you get to make, and you still get the entire Vagrantsong experience with upgrading your characters, getting items, but also brand new content that you get to explore that's going to keep you coming back in this short trip mode. I'm looking forward to trying it, but at this point I have not experienced it, but man, this is something that I am looking forward to trying in the brand new expansion here. And that brings us to the last section of the video. These are my final thoughts as well as my recommendation. You know where I'm coming from Vagrantsong. It's a 9 out of 10 campaign experience for me, one of my favorite campaign games out there, but is Encore worth purchasing? And for me, that's going to be an absolute yes. Vagrantsong Encore provides quality of life upgrades in the form of Westbound Vagrant Standees, the generic coins, these go stop markers that I didn't know that I wanted, and now I'm using them in every single game of Vagrantsong that I'm playing. If you're getting this just for those additional quality of life components, you can ignore all of those additional gameplay elements and be completely satisfied with the expansion. But that being said, the new abilities from the skills and junk cards are intuitive, interesting, and exciting. They explore new parts of the game design space, and they're also easy to understand, use, and are exciting to integrate with your different scenarios, and you can use them with the new content as well as the old. They're things that you're going to want to add to your repertoire and are exciting to come back to. Now, that being said, the scenarios, in addition, offer you brand new ways to play. You've got these small, lower commitment campaigns that are going to be offered, but also the scenarios stand alone strong themselves. Some of my favorite scenarios are in this box, and those are just from the couple preview scenarios that I've gotten a chance to play. I'm looking forward to seeing the creativity that's injected in future scenarios, but for right now, a full 10 out of 10 recommendation from me from SideGame LLC. So that's Vagrantsong Encore. Once again, if you want to take a look at the Kickstarter campaign, I'll leave a link in the description below so that you can get yourself a copy of Encore, and if you haven't already, make sure you get a copy of Vagrantsong, one of the best campaign games out of there. And once again, I don't get any kickback for recommending these games. These are my thoughts, and Vagrantsong Encore is an absolute winner. Thank you so much for watching, and a big thank you to Wyrd Games for sending us a preview copy of Vagrantsong Encore. We are privileged to be a part of this development process. What'd you think about our take on the new content in Vagrantsong Encore? What is your favorite module or scenario that we talked about here, and what are you looking most forward to in the
expansion itself. What do you think about Vagrantsong as a whole? I'd love to hear what you think, but thank you so much for watching. SideGame Strong.